This video is for all of you who have an early ELTO sitting on the back rack awaiting restoration. Many of these ELTOs could be made to run simply by repairing or replacing the coils or wiring. We will show you one way to restore these coils and bring new life to your old ELTO. Here are a collection of ELTO coils. They come in different sizes and styles, but functionally they are all the same. So this is a pretty standard example of what you should expect to find. The coil's not in great shape. It's been taped all over the place. People have made old repairs. The wires are pretty brittle and fragile and very dirty. And you can see even the casing on the individual wires is old and cracked. You can't use any of this. It all has to be replaced. So start by removing all the wires. I like to keep the plug wires because I'll reuse the Raj terminals on the ends of the spark plug wires. Just discard the battery cable and the timer wire. Those are no good. We won't reuse those. So this is the inside of the coil. You can see it has this really hard crystalline-like tar inside. In order to solder new wires onto this, you'd have to clean all of that out and then clean up the wires themselves and try to make a good soldered bond to them. It's very difficult. So this is why we suggest the method we're showing in this video. We're just going to replace the entire internals with modern coils. It's going to make it reliable and a lot less trouble. Once you've removed all the wires, boil the coil in water for about 30 minutes. The end caps are held on by 3 tiny little nails. They must be pulled out. Once the nails are removed, pry the end cap off with a flat screwdriver. Make sure to wear gloves for this part because it's very messy inside. Now this coil wasn't in the bath long enough, so the tar is still a little hard inside. We'll have to put it back in the pot. I like to use a big screwdriver or a hammer handle or something like that to push the insides out. They don't always come out quite this easy, and it's always very messy. It might take a little force to get it out. If it's still too hard, just put it back in the bath again. Let it boil for another 10 minutes. We're not going to save the original coil anyway. Now that the old coil is out, clean the canister with carb cleaner and clear coat if desired. This is an Evinrude Zephyr coil. This is the coil that's usually used for this swap. You have to make sure that these ends, these terminals, are tight. If they're loose like this, it's not going to work. They're going to fail with the vibration of the motor running. So I'm not going to use this coil. I prefer to use this coil. This is a double output coil. It's a modern replacement. It's used for a military application, some sort of generator. Anyway, they're about $15 US at this time, and they work really well. They do come with a coating on each of the outputs, and you have to remove that coating before you can solder to it. It's on there pretty good, but you should see the brass underneath once you get through the coating. And now once it's sanded off, just clean it up with a little bit of carb cleaner to have good contacts for your solder. I use electrical solder. Do not use plumbing solder or anything else. What you have to be careful here is that you don't overheat the coil while soldering. So I'm using a 250 watt solder gun with my electrical solder. Put a little dollop of melted solder on the contact and I move it around till it starts to stick. And once I know I have good adhesion, I remove the heat. If you overheat the coil during soldering, you can actually damage it. You have to be very careful. Now with soldering complete, I like to check it with an ohm meter to make sure it still reaches spec. It should be a little over 10 ohms, which this one is, so it's still good. I do normally do a test before and after soldering. Also tin the ends of your spark plug wire before trying to solder them to the coil. There, with soldering complete, just let it wait a minute to cool down before moving the wires. Now, I like to position the wires like this. It seems to fit inside the coil canister a little better. I like to wrap everything in electrical tape. What this does is it protects the contacts from the hot wax we're going to pour in later. So if we ever have to take it apart, the contacts aren't all covered in wax. There, now the coil's ready to be wired. I like to use 14 gauge 2 conductor exterior grade wire for the timer wiring and for the battery cable. I like to use about 6 feet for the battery cable. That way I have a little bit of choice as to where I put the battery in the boat. So I've gone ahead and crimped on ring terminals to the timer and the battery wiring. I'm connecting 2 black leads from the timer and the battery wire, just using number 6 screws with nuts. I'm connecting it to the ground portion of the AOMCI style universal condenser, which measures 0.22 microfarads. Now I'm taking the white timer lead, the condenser output, and the secondary wire from the coil, and I'm connecting those together. Now the white wire from the battery to the primary of the coil. Okay, you can sort of see how I've got this wired now. Now that it's all connected, I will solder each terminal. I never rely solely on crimping. I like to solder everything. It makes a better joint. Once everything is soldered, I will also wrap it all in black electrical tape, and that will help protect it from the hot wax we're going to pour in. But it would also keep everything isolated from each other so there's no shorts when we put it back in the coil canister. Now that the wiring is complete, it's time to melt some wax. Any canning wax will do. I just use paraffin wax because that's what's available at my hardware store. Need about half a box per coil. And just melt it as per the instructions on the box. Make sure any holes in the coil canister are filled before you pour in the wax, otherwise you'll have a huge mess on the floor. I just use black tape to cover any holes from the inside. That seems to be good enough. One thing I didn't show was that I used black tie straps to create a strain relief on the battery and timer wiring inside the coil canister. That way if the wires get pulled, they won't come out of the canister. Gently position your coil in the vise. And pull the cap off, being careful not to pull too hard on the wires. Now it's time to pour in the wax. Be careful, it's very easy for the wax to get away from you. Leave about a half to 3/4 of an inch of air space for the wax, and then reposition the end cap. Be very careful to make sure that you keep the spark plug wires indexed to each other. Otherwise, the spark plug wires will be in odd positions to each other. Once the wax is cooled, this can't be corrected. You would have to melt the wax and start again. And that's it. Just connect your favorite spark plug terminals and you're ready to install it on your motor. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. On behalf of the Upper Canada chapter of the Antique Outboard Motor Club, thanks for watching and happy outboarding.